This is David Smith. He'll be introducing himself in a few moments. This is a project that is part of our Community Change and Urban Leadership Initiative. We have 3 tracks, 2+2+2, public administration, law, and violence prevention. And the idea is that you have 2 years here at College of Alameda, then 2 years at a university of your choice, preferably CSU East Bay, because we have a relationship with them, and we will follow you that far with our infrastructure. And then you can either go to 2+2+2 to a master's in public administration at CSU East Bay, where we teach also, or you can go on for 2+2 to 3, which is the law school. And we have partnerships with 6 law schools. And that's the program that we have. We have classes next semester, one of which actually is very good for kinesiology for those of you who are in it, called stress management. I don't know if you're aware that that's very big in conflict resolution, but it's also great in kinesiology in terms of sports psychology.
Stress is very important.
Here with Coach, right? And at any rate, with that said, welcome to our event. And I'm going to let David tell you about himself, what he'd like to be told.
Well, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you this afternoon. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, but I want to spend more time working with you and talking to you about issues of peace building and conflict and social justice and things that are related to that. Things that I think are really pressing and important in your own lives, and I think in a kind of broader, even a global sense. As Professor Brem was saying, I'm here today to talk about peace and conflict. And I am actually a consultant. I work with a lot of community colleges. I visit about 20 to 30 community colleges every year talking about conflict resolution. And I work a lot with community college students because I spent about 13 years teaching in a community college in Maryland. Right now I do consulting and I work with colleges and universities, a lot of community colleges. But for about 8 years I was at a think tank in Washington called the United States Institute of Peace that focuses on global and international conflict. And while I was there, I'd work with a lot of college students, and particularly community college students. So I'm here today, and I'm here to get you to think about some things maybe you don't think about, maybe to frame things a little bit differently, but also maybe for you to think about what you want to do and where you want to go in life and the things that you want to focus on. We have some people coming in now, and I'm just going to keep going. And as folks come in and sit down, we'll just kind of join with that. So what I want to start off with is I want to start off with us thinking about symbols. And this is a symbol that I would think some of you would recognize. What is this a symbol of? It's the peace sign, but it's more than the peace sign if you think about what is it actually, if you look at it carefully. It's an earring, it's a piece of jewelry, right? So often we see the peace sign written kind of on paper or some artistic form. But more often than not, when we see the peace sign today, we see the peace sign as we see it as a flag. We see it on backpacks. Anybody have a backpack with the peace sign on it? Does anybody have jewelry with the peace sign on it? Do you have something at home that has the peace sign on it?
I have a tattoo.
You have a tattoo? So a lot of people have different ways of showing the peace sign as a holiday wreath. This is Michelle Obama, as you can tell, and they're showing that she has a peace sign necklace. This says Occupy Memphis. Now, about 2 years ago, there was a national movement, and a lot of young people in their 20s and 30s were involved in it, that really was looking at the economic inequality in the United States and focusing a lot on the financial industry. So there was an Occupy New York, an Occupy Memphis, an Occupy Washington, probably an Occupy San Francisco movement all around the United States. And it was a resistance movement. It was an activist movement. And so they used the peace sign as representing what they were doing also. Part of the American flag. This one, I don't know. This is like maybe the Gap or Claire's Boutique or something like that. I mean, how many of you have been in the mall and you see like a big display of the peace sign, right? And they're selling clothing because of it. Anybody recognize this one? Paris, right. So this, the artist of this is artist named Jean Julien. He's a French artist. And he is an artist, and he created this like right when everything was happening. And he actually, I think he posted on his own social media, and it just kind of took off like viral, basically. Everyone now associates it with what happened in Paris. So if you look at it carefully, you see the peace sign, and you see within the peace line the Eiffel Tower. So a lot of people have been posting on social media about how they're, how they're heartbroken and they're concerned, and they're looking at what's going on in Paris, and praying for people in Paris. You see that going up a lot. But what I want to do is I want to tell you what the peace sign really means, because a lot of symbols we see and we kind of assume they mean something. I mean, if somebody landed here from an alien planet and they saw the peace sign, they wouldn't have a clue what it is. But in many ways, it's ubiquitous. That is, it's used everywhere for lots of different movements. But it didn't start being used for different movements. It really started as something that was designed in the anti-nuclear movement of the 1940s and 50s. So those of you who remember history a little bit, in 1945 we dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that started the atomic era. And part of it was a competition between what was in the Soviet Union that became Russia and the United States. So there was an arms race. And so you had around the United States, and certainly in the Bay Area, efforts to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons. A lot of communities created nuclear-free zones where you couldn't have any kind of nuclear fuel, in a sense, not necessarily weapons, but anything that was part of creating any kind of nuclear weaponry. So in 1958, there was a march that went from London to Aldermaston, Britain, England. It was like a 60-mile march, and it was to protest what was going on at a nuclear weapons. It was a military base. So the people that were organizing the march needed some sort of an emblem, we would say. And so they went to this guy named Gerald Holton, who was a commercial artist. And they said, Gerald, could you develop something for us of some sort? So as any commercial artist, he was kind of thinking various ideas. And he came up with this. So has anybody ever heard the word semaphore? Anybody been on a boat or been a lifeguard, right? And you see people with the flags signaling, right? Lifeguards don't use it so much because they got walkie-talkies and other ways of communicating. But semaphore is flag signaling that was more popular when we didn't have other ways of communicating. And this in semaphore is N, and this in semaphore is D, right? And it stands for nuclear disarmament. So the peace sign is actually semaphore for nuclear disarmament. And so it started in that way, looking at nuclear disarmament, then it spread to being used in many, many different ways. Luckily, Gerald Holton and the group that protested in Britain didn't copyright it or trademark or try to sell it or anything like that. So now it's used all around the world, and it really means a whole range of kind of progressive, social justice type issues. But it really started as a symbol that was used to oppose nuclear arms. So I want to spend a minute now talking more about peace and getting you to reflect on your own views of when you think about peace, what it means. And I want to contrast what I call peace as ends and peace as means. So when I say means and ends, what am I referring to? What's the relationship between means and ends? Anybody? Right? Ends is the destination, right? So if I got in a car and said, I'm going to drive from here to Sacramento, right? Sacramento is where I go to. How am I going to get there, right? It's the journey that you take, right? And the journey, a lot of people would say, is really reflective of the destination. This is something I'll show you a quote in a few minutes that'll get you to think a little bit about that. When we often think about peace as ends, though, we often are thinking in terms of symbolism. So that's a symbolism for peace. But many people would argue that this is symbolism for peace also. If you ask anybody here a veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan, or know somebody who's been a veteran, a family member, right? If you were to ask them why were they in Iraq and Afghanistan, they would probably say to you, I was there to make peace. And I wouldn't argue with them. I think everyone has their own personal definition of peace. So a lot of people associate patriotism and military service with peace work because that's what they're trying to do. When we think now about whether the United States is going to engage more in the fight against the Islamic State, right? Now that's what happened in Paris over the weekend and what the president's thinking. We're always talking in terms of how do we militarily, and some people would argue you can't do this militarily, but there are people that would argue that you can. How do you create peace in that way? How do you reduce the violence or stop the conflict? Anybody know what this is a picture of? I know it's kind of small. It's the Taj Mahal in India. Have you been there? You're from India. So the Taj Mahal is in Agra, India, which is south of Delhi. It's a Muslim holy site. So people go there. A lot of tourists go there. But if you go there on Friday, it's a lot of people are going there because they're being observant. Right? This is not to say peace is the Taj Mahal, but what I'm saying here is peace is often framed in terms of your spirituality. Many of you are from faith communities, right? And when you think about peace, you think about what you're doing in your synagogue or your mosque or your church or your temple on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. You know, that connected to you is peace, right? And so you associate that with, more than anything else, with being at peace, your relationship with your faith, you would say. How many people associate this with peace? Peace and quiet, right? So for some people, when they think about peace, they're thinking about solitude, going to the beach, right? Having a little bit of time to themselves. Peace is not spiritual. Peace is not political. It's not symbolic. It's kind of a state of being, right? And maybe it's meditative, but sometimes it's a matter of getting away from it all. Some people think about that in terms of peace. What's that a picture of? Prison. Now, why could this also be a symbol or way of understanding peace? So after, the judge sentences somebody, after a trial, the family, who have been often the victims or have suffered because there's a press conference, and what do they always say? We're at peace.
Because they know what the results were.
Right. Right. They know that there's been justice, and they're equating justice with peace. Now, it might not be everybody's way of looking at peace, but for some people, that's how they look at peace. And there's also arguments said and made out there that even people who serve time incarcerated, right, sometimes that's peace for them also. This kind of removal from society. Sometimes people feel that they're better separated. Not a lot of people, but there are studies that show that also. But these are all peace as ends, places that you go and spirituality that you feel. And what I want to think about peace is I want to think about peace as a process, as something that you engage in. So the first thing that I would show is this is a conversation between two people. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is something that we sometimes call dialogue. Dialogue is a conversation between two individuals, often two individuals that are very different than each other. So let me tell you a little bit of a story. In August of 2014, I was in Ferguson, Missouri. I was invited by the community college there to spend 2 days, the end of August, meeting with students and faculty. And while I was there, I was interviewing students and faculty about how they felt about what happened in Ferguson and help the college figure out what they could do going forward. And one of the things that I heard, there were 4 campuses. This is the St. Louis Community College District. 2 campuses are predominantly African American, and 2 campuses are predominantly white. In many respects, it's a very separated system. So particularly, I spent most of my time with the African American students, and what I heard from them is that no one knows our story. No one talks to us. And they were really referring to students who are not black. That we have these experiences and these stories that are very different, that no one listens to us. At one point during my meetings with students, there was a meeting where I had students from, it's the Florissant Valley campus, which is predominantly African American in Ferguson, and then students had come up from the Merrimack campus, which is predominantly white. And after the meeting, I had a 18, 19-year-old, I'm just predicting their ages, a white girl and a black girl talking to each other. They had never met each other before, and they were in an extended conversation for 10 minutes. And I was kind of listening to the conversation. And the conversation was all about, let me tell you what it's like. Right? And mostly the black girl explained to the white girl, having that type of dialogue and conversation. Right? We don't engage in that in the United States. We hear things through innuendo and through the newspapers. We don't get into understanding people's personal experiences. Because it's in getting personal experiences you understand what their life is all about. I had a conversation the same day I was meeting with a group of young men that afternoon, part of what's called the African American Initiative. And these young men were talking about their experiences with police brutality. And as you can't tell, I'm a white man of a certain age. So, you know, I have certain experiences, and I don't know police brutality. I've never experienced it, but I do hear about it. But I hear about it through the newspaper, right, and through media. But to sit down with somebody who tells you this is what happened to me was the most amazing aha moment I'd ever had. But we don't have those aha moments because we don't have those conversations. I remember sitting down with one young black man. He was 19 years old, and he was talking about he has a white girlfriend. And he had been traveling in South St. Louis. St. Louis is kind of divided north and south, black and white. And a white police officer pulled him over, and the white police officer was hitting on his girlfriend. Asked his girlfriend why she was dating him. So when we think about humility, right? Not humility. When we think about humiliation, I should say, humiliation, and we think about, what we talk about as harassment, and we think about police brutality, we often talk about it in kind of a physical sense, but there's also psychologically these things can happen also. But once again, if you don't have these conversations, you never learn about this. That's why dialogue is so important. So this is a means to peace, having these types of difficult conversations with people that are different than you are. This is actually a picture of the Secretary of State. You can't really tell him, John Kerry, talking with some other people, right? So what are they talking about? I don't know what they're talking about. What they're doing there is they're engaging in negotiation. They're actually using a skill. There are skill sets, negotiation and mediation. So, how often have you seen, let me ask you, have you ever seen two friends kind of arguing it out, or maybe in your family members, and you say, I need to walk into that and try to figure out what's going on and help them? How many of you have ever done that? Right? Some of you, that's playing the role of a mediator. Now, some people instinctively do that, and they do it very well. But actually, you can be trained to do that. You can be trained to go into that situation and help people figure out what's going on. It's a very important skill. So that's a skill set. That's also a means to peace. What's this gentleman doing here? Anybody can tell? He's an aid worker because he's got a Red Cross. So he's part of an affiliate of the American Red Cross. Probably he's somewhere overseas and he's holding a young child, right? So what he's representing is humanitarianism, right? The spirit and the efforts that we do to contribute to our community to make it a better community. How many of you do humanitarian work in your own community, right? You work in a shelter or a soup kitchen or other types of agencies. You give up your time. That's humanitarian work that's very important. Some of you may aspire to do it overseas. You want to go work for Doctors Without Borders, or you're going to want to work for the Red Cross, or you want to do bigger picture things. These are all means to peace because you're alleviating people's suffering. What's this demonstration of? What does the sign say? Power to the people. So what am I showing in this photograph? What am I demonstrating? Could be, but it's protest. That's what it is. It's nonviolent protest. It's being able to make change nonviolently through collective action. One of the big issues in this country today is that young people don't know how to do this anymore. One of the things that I heard in Ferguson, for instance, is that people were telling me, older people who had come out of the civil rights movement saying, young people today don't know how to react to what's going on, so they're reacting in ways that are just not good ways of reacting. You have to be trained to engage in nonviolent social action. It just doesn't come naturally. Martin Luther King and other people trained people when they were going into the South to do things that they were doing, right? Rosa Parks didn't just show up on a bus one day. She was trained. She's a member of the NAACP. She knew how to react when she got on that bus, right? In fact, when she got on that bus, she actually originally sat in the seats that were reserved for African Americans. And then what happened was, as more whites came on the bus driver had to move the line back, right? Create more space for the whites, less space for the blacks. And she says, I'm not moving, right? And that was the beginning of the Montgomery bus boycott, right? So it's all of these different actions, these things that people learn, right, that become really, really important and skills that they can apply in other ways. And finally, I would say education is important. Education is probably the most powerful ways of building peace in a society. And so let me kind of put it out to you this way. Think about your own educational experiences in the United States, right? They're fairly linear. That is, they kind of follow progression, right? By the time you're 5, you know 3 languages, and 10, you know quantum physics, and 15, you're in college, right? Is that the way it works here? No, not quite like that. But there is a sequence about it, right? You go to parts of the world where there is no education system to speak of, where students are illiterate. Sometimes those are places that have involved in very serious civil war. Probably some of you have heard about child soldiers who are pulled out of their communities and their villages when they're 7 or 8 years old and required to do heinous things against their own community and then go out and live in the bush for 15 years. And then they come out in their 20s and they say, now go look for a job. And they say, well, I can't read, I can't write. I know what to do. I can operate an AK-47. I know how to do that. So that's what they earn their living on, right? Or young women who've been pulled out into the bush and they've also been child soldiers and they've been forced in sexual servitude. So they come back, they can't read, they can't write, they can't count, but then they work the streets to make a living, right? So if you want to ensure peace, build an education system where people are learning skills. If you look at prison populations, one thing you can say for sure, there's a direct correlation with lack of educational skills and somebody ends up in prison at some point in their life in the correctional system, right? So I said I put up a quote. So this is talking about the sense of means that I want you to think about. They say that means are after all just means. I would say means are after all everything. As the means, so the end. If you take care of the means, we are bound to reach the end sooner or later. And this guy is the guy who said it. Anybody know who he is? Anybody want to guess? Well, this is somebody, you don't see him when he's 19, right? He's 19 years old. He's about the age of some of you. We see him when he looks like this for the most part, okay? Gandhi was 19 once, right? That's a picture of him when he was in London studying to be a lawyer, because back then you could go to law school when you were much younger, right? So he believed very strongly, a lot of people very strongly, that it's the means that we need to focus on. If we do the right means, we get the right ends. And things like building skills and education and dialogue, how we treat each other, humanitarianism, all of that are really part of these means that are so important. But now you're going to tell me what you think peace is. So, in just a minute, I'm going to get you to stand up. And this is what I'm going to tell you to do. I'm telling you what to do. I just don't want you to do it yet. Okay? I want everybody to come here, and I want you to stand just like these folks are doing. They're going to stand here, and they're going to face me, though I'm not going to stand on a chair, I don't think. I don't have to. And you're going to stand here, right? And you're going to squeeze together as if you are in a subway car. Is there subways, right? The BART system, does it get crowded sometimes? Early in the morning, okay? And that's all I want you to do. Then I'm going to tell you what to do after that. So I need everybody to come up here and to stand here. All right, so this is what we're going to do. So if you look to your right, you see a sign that says not peace. You see that? And you look to your left, and you see a sign that says peace, right? So I'm going to read you 3 statements. And I want you, after the statement, I want you just to think really quickly and really immediately if what you are thinking at that point is peace or what you're thinking is not peace. And I'm not going to give you an explanation. And whatever you're feeling, I want you to walk. If you feel very strongly what I'm saying is peace, I want you to walk as close to that sign as you can without hurting yourself in the concrete. And same thing with not peace. If not, I want you to work somewhere in the middle, right? So it's a matter of kind of a continuum. Okay? Got it? Here's the first statement. So just for a moment, you go back to high school. I know it's very painful, but just think about it for a minute. You go back to high school. Okay? Okay. Very painful. So in your high school, there has been increasing levels of violence going on in the school district. And it's changed. The neighborhood has changed, and things are happening. There are gangs, lots of craziness in the high school. So what the school district has decided to do is this school district has decided to put up metal detectors and armed guards as you go into the school every day. Is that peace, or is that not peace? Okay. All right, so you see where everyone is? This is always a very interesting exercise, and these types of exercises where people have to kind of walk their feelings is really important because we often don't have these kind of conversations with people, and sometimes you're standing there and you see somebody and say, what is she doing over there? I thought she thought like me, right? Kind of like that. So I have a lot of people over saying they're saying it's not peace. So I want somebody to tell me why they think it's not peace. I'm going to ask you right in the back there, because your hair is the same color as my daughter's hair. She's 16 and she colors the same way. Why is this not peace to you?
I mean, to me, it seems like it tears down a person. You know what I mean? Like, if you, as a person, like, how are you supposed to feel when you know that you have to walk through a metal detector and be, you know, with armed guards to have to go to school every day? And then to also know that other places in the world, it's not like that. So then it makes you think, like, well, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my community? What's wrong with my school?
Okay. Anyone want to add to that? Any other reasons why you think this is not peace to me? This approach is not peaceful approach. Yes, sir.
The environment, it shows that the environment is not peace. That's why they have all these things.
Okay. But the response is not a peaceful response, you're saying also, right? Are there other responses you think the school board could be engaged in?
Absolutely.
Somebody else? Yeah? Speak loudly.
I think that just having the metal detectors and taking like weapons away and things like that can be, I mean, it's frustrating like to have things that maybe that is not a weapon taken away from you, but at the same time, like you're just taking something away from them. You're not educating them on how to like, you know, be peaceful and get along.
So it's what we call panacea. You ever heard the word of panacea? It doesn't really solve anything. It's like a Band-Aid. Maybe something like that. Okay. All right. So keep with that. But we have people who think differently. So tell me why you think this is peace.
Well, I think I would have peace in the classroom knowing that someone decided to put some protection up to stop someone from coming through our school that had, you know, a gun, a bomb, or whatever, would relax more than not knowing, not having that protection and knowing that anyone can just come on our campus with anything.
So it's creating a space for students that's kind of a safe space for them. I mean, if you think about their kids are often coming to school and they're taking their own lives in their hands just walking to school for that matter. And they get to school and it's a place that they can learn. That idea.
I feel the same way. I feel a sense of safe, peace, you know, serenity in terms of my mindset, that I can concentrate, knowing that everyone that's here on this campus at this point, because of the security that's been put in place, we can feel safe.
Okay. So you all in the middle are a bit confused or not certain, or you feel torn, or what? Why are you in the middle?
I agree with both sides.
You agree with both sides. How can you agree with both sides? I guess you can.
I feel like it depends on the situation. If you look at school-wise or like the environment, it's like the teachers and the people that feel safe, but at the same time, you look at the community side, they can react differently and stuff.
Okay. How many of you in this room went to a high school that had metal detectors and armed guards in it? Raise your hand. Okay. So for everybody else in this room except for you, it's just theoretical. You don't really know because you've never experienced it. That doesn't seem, it's not valid what you're thinking. But you lived in a high school like that, right? So you know it firsthand. And why I say that is that when we look at these issues, we look at them through lenses. I mean, sometimes it's actual lenses, but they're lenses that are kind of impact and affect how we view things. They might be experience or a background or a culture or whatever. Experience is a very powerful lens. When somebody's had a certain experience, it's important for us to acknowledge the experience that they've had, right? We can think about it in different ways, right? These are the lenses that we look in, but experience sometimes is really important to look at. All right, come back in the middle. We'll do another one. No, you're not sitting down yet. I just got you going now. All right. So, so you live with your mom, and you live with your dad, and one morning you decide you're going to campus. You're coming here, College of Alameda, and you leave on your dresser $20, and it's $20 you've earned as part of your job. It's $20 cash, and you absolutely know with certainty, absolute certainty, there's nobody else in the house the entire day, and except for your mom, and the $20 is gone.
Is there any animals?
No animals, just your mom. How are you feeling? Is it peace or is it not peace? So I'm going to start over here because you're not quite on the wall, but you're feeling it's more not peace. Why?
Right. I feel because if it's my money. I mean, it would be different if my mom would have asked me for the money, or she's like, oh, hey, I see the $20 on your dresser. Do you mind if I borrow it? Like, that would be a whole different story. But if she just took it without you knowing, and you're like wondering where my money go, like that's my hard-working money, then I feel like that's not me.
Okay. You feel the same? Similar to that? Okay.
I feel like even though she's your mother and you might have like an understanding, you know, with sharing money or something like that, it's still, you know, your hard-earned money, and it's still her kind of taking something away from you that's still yours.
Okay. But you all are thinking differently over here, huh? Why are you over here?
I'm over here because I feel that, I'm at peace. It's me and my mom in the house. She done took care of me so many years, and if I have $20 and it's left on my dresser and she got it, you know, she must have needed it.
Okay.
Maybe she couldn't contact me.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we had no means to communicate. Mm-hmm. But that's my mama.
Okay. Okay.
She can have it. Whatever I have, she can have it.
Okay.
And that's how I feel.
I'm in the wrong section.
Go. And that's what's good about this. As you hear people arguing, you think maybe I'm not. Anybody else? Do you feel the same way or similar to that? Or an argument you'd make similar to that? All right. How many of you are moms over there? Yeah, right.
But I'll be pissed.
But you're also daughters. You're also daughters, right?
I would.
You can't be pissed because
That's
you just
different,
said.
though. That's different to me.
All right. So the lens here is a different type of lens. So in cultures and in families and societies, there are often kind of values that are kind of part of growing up. And one of the American myth, or a predominant American value, is a sense of independence. As you grow, you get your driver's license and you get a job and you do your own things, and you don't want your parents nosing in your business. And so, you know, my daughter used to have signs on her door, you know, do not enter under pains of death or something like that. I mean, she's 16 right now. But this idea of independence is really important, right? And this idea, for those of you who are kind of on this end of it, that may be where that's coming from. And maybe your parents raised you to think about that type of independence, because that brings responsibility and it brings accountability. But there are other types of values that permeate in families and cultures that are more communal. This idea that, you know, what is yours is mine and what is mine is yours, and we're all part of a collective family. And sometimes that's very cultural. Some people live in cultures that are like that, right? So my wife is half Indian, and I've been to India a couple times in an Indian family. At least our Indian family, I don't know who owns what. I don't even know what people's rooms are for that matter, right? Because there's a collectiveness in the way things operate, right? Both of those are important values. Sometimes they come into conflict with each other, right? As you progress through life, some people take I'm going to do it all myself and not going to seek out help, and maybe that's appropriate at times. And then some people want to seek out help, and maybe that's appropriate at times, but they conflict with each other, okay? So let's sit down. So these two examples, these are not, this is not rocket science. These are things that you do every day, right? And these things represent the things that often people are in conflict with. They're conflict over what's peace. If people can't agree as to what peace is, what does that mean that we have to do at times? You know, if you come home and you yell at your mom when your mom was saying, you know, we were short this week, I need to go out buy groceries, what is the approach that you have to take with your mom, or maybe your mom has to take with you? We have to find ways of working it out, of talking about it, of negotiating it, you know, of having levels of understanding that we can reach. Because it's hard enough that we have conflict in the world that we tend to fight about. We often have a hard time figuring out what peace is and what peace means in our community, and people have different objectives. Just like the person who thinks it's the peace sign and somebody thinks it's the American flag, we need to kind of work to find out what that middle might be at times. So let's talk about conflict for a minute. Anybody know who this is? Martin Luther King, he just got booked. You know what it means to get booked, right? He's in a Birmingham jail, right? How many of you read King's letter from a Birmingham jail? Okay. So Martin Luther King wrote this letter, right? He's like, the New York Times actually asked him to write it, if I remember. But in any case, he writes this letter, and he's responding to the community, the religious community in Birmingham, who are mad at him. The religious community is pretty, they want change, but they're kind of a traditional community. And they say, we don't want conflict. Conflict is not a good thing in our community. Conflict is bad. We don't like your tactics. And what King is basically saying, he says, direct action is a form of conflict, is that I engage in direct action to start discussions and negotiations. And basically, if you continue this, it's to kind of open up and empower people. When people think about conflict, they generally think about conflict as a negative, right? When you think about conflict, you think about war, and you think about people not getting along, and fighting, and violations of human rights, and all those different things. And that's the way conflict is managed. That's the way conflict is dealt with. But conflict actually is opportunity. And if we view conflict as opportunity, it becomes very different in our experience. Conflict is the way we make change. Martin Luther King loved conflict. He was always going to conflict. He wasn't making it violent, but he thought, by going to conflict, then I'm opening up and having a conversation about something, right? So, think about the conflicts that you have in your own lives with your family or with professors or with other students or with whomever. You often take the attitude that you avoid it or walk away from it, or it becomes the end of the relationship, rather than looking at the conflict as an opportunity for change and empowerment. There's a famous story about Galileo. Galileo was an astronomer. And at one point he said, you know what, the sun, he said the earth is not the center of the universe. The sun is. And the Catholic Church was really upset and put him on house arrest. It's a major conflict, right? But that conflict opened up a new way of looking at science after that. So often these significant events that are conflict-based in life or over history open opportunities for other things that have happened. Just like what King did. All of King's work in going to the conflict really set in motion the civil rights advancements that we've all benefited from. So I want to change a little bit. I want to talk about skills, because that's what I wanted to really get to in a sense. And talking to you about what you do at work and in life. So one of the things that is talked about a lot today in higher education is the fact that people who go to work, young people and older people for that matter, really are deficient. That is, they don't have skills to get along with other people. We often are really, really good at technical skills, but we're not very good at skills that allow people to be able to work with each other. Go look at the last job ad you applied for, you want to apply for, and I can guarantee you that somewhere in that job it says, has to be prepared to work as a team. But people don't know how to work as a team because people don't develop the aptitudes to work as a team. So often they fail at work. So increasingly what employers are saying is they're saying we need to focus on what we call soft skills. Being able to deal with conflict without walking out of the room, being able to negotiate, being able to create a team, being able to compliment people, being able to take criticism without getting defensive. These are all soft skills that, in a sense, were more likely to determine whether you succeed or fail at work today. So I want to show you a video for a minute. And this video is about dialogue. Dialogue is a skill. That is, being able to have a conversation with people, right? But this is not a dialogue like you've seen normally. This is a dialogue where there are two young women who are 17 years old who go to a camp in Maine for 3 weeks. One woman is Israeli and one woman is Palestinian. So if you don't know it, there's been a conflict going on in the Middle East for a long time, 70 years or 7,000 years, depending on how you interpret it, right? And it basically pits Israelis and the state of Israel against Palestinians and the Palestinian territory and the larger Arab world, right? And these Israelis and Palestinians in Israel live very separate from each other. They don't really know each other. They don't trust each other. And periodically, there are high levels of violence. So for instance, right now, there's a lot of violence going on in Israel and Palestine, okay?
Young people can be important players in the search for peace. They may see opportunities for resolving conflict that are beyond the imagination of their elders. They are less burdened with traumas of the past. And as future leaders, they are motivated to shape the world they will inherit. Seeds of Peace, which is supported by the Institute, is a unique summer camp experience for young people on both sides of conflict. It prepares young leaders from Israel and the Palestinian territories to think afresh about one of the world's most enduring conflicts. Graduates of the Seeds Camp have gone on to become peace builders in their home communities. Here is one story.
My name is Tamar Whitus. I'm 17 years old. I'm a religious Jew, and I'm from Rehovot, Israel. Growing up, we didn't have that many ideas about Palestinians or the conflict. Once I got older, I started getting more interested in news, and that's when I started hearing about the other side.
My name is Suma Al-Qawasmi. I'm 17 years old. I'm Palestinian from Jerusalem. I live in Sheikh Jarrah. We have a lot of problems with Israeli soldiers, governments, because they want to take the land.
This whole land, many religious people feel like there's nothing here that you can compromise, and as long as the other side wants that land, there's nothing we can do.
I wanted to come to the Seeds of Peace camp because I want to see how the other side, Israeli, think about us.
The main problem of this conflict is you just don't know the other side. I had no idea what the other side was like. I barely knew what my side was like.
I used to think that Israeli, they are bad person, I can't communicate with them, I can't talk to them, I can't share anything with them. We sit and we share ideas, opinion. We don't have to accept the other side opinions, just we have to listen to them and to understand.
It started off as very loud yelling.
I know we have different opinions, but it's okay. I know now that I can listen to them.
It was very important for me personally to hear the personal stories. What's bothering me, what I feel, what is my hurt, what is happening back at home.
We feel that we are equal. It makes it more possible to talk and to share.
The main thing of how people can go out with trust is, hey, I just had a good time. I caught myself laughing with this person, and then I suddenly realized, wait a second, this is the person that I yelled at an hour ago, and that just gives you the opportunity to see the person underneath. Coming back from camp, I started with a sense of I need to teach them and I need to show them no matter what they think.
I spoke with other people, like my friends, my neighbors. Maybe the thing which I can do now is spread the opinions that Israeli, they are human beings the same as us.
Young people are more important to peacemaking because they still have enough of an open mind to learn. I mean, we haven't started our path in life yet, so we can choose to go on a path of working towards it.
You can say that they are the future, so they can achieve something.
So the two young women, they talk about their experiences at summer camp, Suma and Tamara. And one of the things you find out about them is that they don't know about each other because they've never been told the stories about each other. They've always been told kind of false stories, kind of what we call a narrative that's not true. So Israelis are taught to believe that Palestinians are evil people. Palestinians are taught to believe that Israelis are evil people. And then they go to this camp, and what you find at the camp is there's a lot of sports activities going on. And one of the things that you see is you don't find the Israelis and the Palestinians playing against each other. What you find the Israelis and Palestinians are playing on the same team. And so that's the thought that if you are somebody that's different than somebody else, but you can spend time together on the same team, you build a level of trust that's really important. So there's really value in having activities with people that are different than you are. And then the last thing I ask you to think about is when they go back to their societies or they go back to their communities, in their communities, what is that they deal with? And one of the challenges that they deal with is being able to share with their peers about the experience that they have. You know, when we talk about speaking truth to power, we often think about it in terms of speaking truth to a higher administrative authority or a dictator or a government or something like that. But speaking truth to power is often speaking truth to your peers, because your peers, actually, your friends, are often the most powerful force in your life that you don't recognize. And telling them something different than they know, something that contradicts a lot of what they believe, is really hard to do. So we talk about that experience. So when it's posted, I'll give you the link to it, and other people can kind of see the video, and you'll be able to get it that way. So let me do another thing here. On your the handout that you have, everybody's got a handout. And I want you to go to that for a minute, okay? And in the handout, towards the back, there is something called New Employees at the Diner, and on the other side it says the new nurse. Okay? So I'm going to read through. We're going to do New Employees at the Diner, and I want you to think about this, and then I'm going to ask you some questions afterwards. And this is what I want you to recognize. That we are always placed in situations where we're called upon to deal with differences. We're called upon to intervene or intercede. Sometimes we're required to do it because it's our job. Sometimes we want to do it because it's people that we love and we care about. What we have to think about is, what is it that we need? What are the abilities and aptitudes we need to do that effectively? What is it that we have to know about ourselves and other people? Okay? How many here work besides going to school? Right? You have jobs. How many of you work in food service? Like you work in a diner or a restaurant or something like that. All right? That's pretty typical. Right? And so you're all working, you're all environments. Some of you are staff. Some of you may even have some responsibilities like being assistant managers. Pretty typical, right? So let's assume for a minute that this is also, you can read it in the sheet that I have, that is you work at a local diner as an assistant manager. So that's your job. And you enjoy your work, and your manager, in a sense, has given you more responsibility lately, including the ability to hire employees, which is pretty cool because you're like 19 years old, right? But you've been working there for a while. And he needs new employees, so he's asked you to hire new employees. Recently, you had 2 employees, one to work in the kitchen, the other is waitstaff. Both employees are Mexican, and this, hard to believe maybe for this area, but these are the first 2 Mexican employees they've ever had in the restaurant. Okay? So brand new. You've hired 2 Mexican employees, and up to then there were no Mexican employees. First Spanish-speaking employees in the diner. And one has really good English skills, the other one not so good English skills, but they both want to work. Most of the staff is welcoming, but there's a cohort, there are several employees who are not pleased that these folks were hired. They're not happy about it at all. One reason may be that they had to take a slight reduction in hours when the new employees came on board. So, when you hire new people, sometimes the schedule's rearranged, some people are going to not get so many hours, and so forth. But there's also an overall issue of tolerance and diversity, of tolerance and diversity in Latinos. That is, he's sensing that these employees are just not tolerant of people who are of Latin background, Latino, Mexican background, basically. These not so supportive employees don't speak Spanish, and the new employees tend to use Spanish when speaking to each other. So in the restaurant, they use Spanish with each other. The other employees don't know Spanish. Today, at work, one of the employees used a racial epithet in characterizing one of the kitchen workers. So it was some sort of derogatory terminology. You heard it, but you don't think that the person who said it knows that you heard it, and you don't think the kitchen staff person you heard it, but you reported to the manager. And the manager has said to you, you need to fix this. I want my restaurant to be welcoming to all people, particularly Latinos. So what are you going to do about it? So I'm asking you, what are you going to do about it? What would the approach that you would take if you were the assistant manager? What would you try to find out? What skill sets would you think are important? What would you want the outcome to be? Right? What would you try to find out if that was your job? And your job is important to you, and impressing your boss is important to you. And you want these new employees to succeed. But you may also not want the employees that are there to quit either, for that matter. Because if they go out in the community and they start talking about, well, we were fired, right? That's not going to be a good reputation for that restaurant. Yeah.
A couple of things. Number one, talk to the individual who is causing all these problems privately and discuss with them what the issue is. And later on, then call all the employees and tell them what you want them to do.
Right.
And have them, asking them what their problem is and how you want the place to be.
So the first thing you're saying is really important. Sometimes having an individual conversation with somebody is better than having a conversation with everybody. Right? If you suspect that one person in particular is the ringleader, find out what his concern's about. That person might have their own fears and anxieties that they're dealing with. Right? They lost some hours. They need the job. They're going to have to find out. They may not necessarily not like Mexicans, but they've got some stress that they're dealing with also. So you get to understand what's going on there, and that leads you maybe to a broader conversation. What else? Do you talk to the new employees?
Yes.
Why do you talk to the new employees?
Because you want them to feel welcome.
You want them to feel welcome.
You need to have a culture change.
Culture change, right? How about the issue of speaking Spanish at work?
Exactly. You have to tell them.
Right? Is that an issue?
Yes.
It might be an issue, right? We want people to build their English skills. That doesn't mean you shouldn't speak Spanish, right? But you don't want a situation where people don't communicate. Maybe you send the old employees to learn Spanish. That's an option also, right? So, you don't know where that's going to go, but having that conversation may be very important, right? What type of skills do you need to have those conversations? What kind of personal skills and aptitudes do you need? Right? Are you just going to kind of slam in there and start yelling at people? What are you going to do? You need to have influence, okay? And how do you have influence? Leadership, okay. Now, talk to me about more what we would call more micro type skills. Like leadership's a more macro, but what is it specifically you're going to have to be able to do? How about listen, right? You're going to have to be a very good listener. You can't go into that meeting and make demands. You've got to go in there and be willing to listen, right? And being able to observe what's going on and how people are feeling, right? You're going to have to be in a position where you're making suggestions in a way that doesn't offend people, doesn't get people to quit, right? You're going to have an attitude of inclusivity. You're saying to we'll say the white and black employees who are threatening to quit, and they're upset, look, we're all in this restaurant together. We want you to be in this restaurant also. You want them to feel welcome. People are often very uncomfortable with change. Doesn't do well on them. They get scared. So you have to reassure them and reassure the Mexican workers, right? Now, you don't know where this is going to end up, but one of the things that you recognize is that this is going to need some thought and some planning. It isn't something you're just going to show up and do. But all these skills are the types of soft skills we were talking about before. These are the skills that employers need. They need someone who can have that conversation and can do that things and to resolve something without people quitting and so forth. The other scenario I gave you has to do with a nurse, and you can read that on your own. Nurse has been hired in a hospital setting. She's a young nurse out of community college, and she's Filipino, so she speaks Tagalog. She speaks Filipino. And she's being hired in a hospital where her boss is much older than she is. It's from a different generation. Those of you who are in healthcare recognize that there's a lot of conflict in healthcare today between younger nurses and older nurses, right? It's called actually lateral violence at times and bullying that goes on. So it's actually more common than you think where older nurses get antagonistic or younger nurses, and younger nurses are all upset, right? So this older nurse has been criticizing the younger nurse. She's been speaking Filipino because there's some patients who only speak Filipino, and the older nurse doesn't like that. The older nurse doesn't like how she dresses. The older nurse doesn't like anything about her. And now she's been given her performance review, and it's negative. So she has to have a meeting with that older nurse. What is the attitude that she takes to that meeting? Does she go in and she's bombastic and accusatory, right? What's the attitude that she takes? Someone? Well, what would her attitude be in that type? Somebody else. You look like you're thinking. What would be the attitude that she would take?
Try to understand why she is acting that way towards you.
Right, try to maybe understand the motivation of the nurse, the senior nurse, to ask that way. Maybe there's some fear on her side. Maybe there's some anxiety. Maybe you don't even know that story, right? But going in and being able to listen and to understand rather than to make accusations is the best way of doing it. It's a learning experience for her, and it may be a learning experience for the older nurse, and maybe there was misunderstanding. In many of those situations, the younger nurse quits, doesn't even go to the evaluation. This is what I hear, because they don't know how to deal with that conflict and how to make that conflict a positive experience for change, right? Think about all the professional situations that you're going to put yourself in. Some of you are going into business and going to healthcare. Sometimes you're going to be in the nurse in the more subordinate position, but sometimes you're going to be like the assistant manager in the leadership position. And then there are different skills that you're going to use depending on where you are. All right, so let me finish up talking about peace building work. I don't know how much time I have, but I know some folks have to leave in a few minutes. And talking about peace building work, and then I'll finish the presentation, then we can just have a more generalized discussion. So one of the things that I do a lot of work on is talking about careers to college students and getting them to think about working to promote peace. One of the things I recognize is that there are a lot of ways of promoting peace. It's not a matter of being a mediator or being a diplomat. It's really a matter in many, many different occupations you can work, that the work that you do, the outcome of that work, in a sense, sometimes it's an indirect outcome, is improving the lifestyle, the community, the health of the community. For instance, an educator, people would say, well, if I'm going to go teach, I'm not really teaching about peace. But if you're teaching reading and writing and computational skills and mathematics, and that allows a person to be able to support themselves without leading a life of violence, then you are working at peace. What I suggest is that, first of all, when people work, you often are working at peace at different levels. One is what we call the micro level. Some people, what they want to do is work one-on-one with people. That's what they want to do, right? That's their life. They want to be a counselor, or they want to work in healthcare, or they want to do that kind of stuff, right? Some people, what they call the meso is a word means middle, the middle level, which is often a group. So some people like to work with groups. So for instance, people might say, I want to be a group organizer. I want to be a community activist. You know who was a community activist and went on to become president of the United States? Barack Obama in Chicago. That's what he was as a community activist. Okay? And then some people want to work on the macro level, which is often the global level. So they want to do diplomatic work, right? Or they want to work in kind of the big picture items, right? All those are good ways of approaching it, right? The conflict and the skills are different. But like I said, some jobs are more indirect. That is, the work that you're doing isn't so obvious, like being an educator. Most jobs are indirect. If you're a nurse and you work in a hospital and you're working on trauma and you're working in an emergency room and you're meeting with people and talking to them after their son has been shot and you're trying to comfort them and trying to reassure them, you're a peace builder. It's more indirect than direct, but that's what you're doing, right? So there's lots of jobs that you can make indirect. There are not as many jobs you can make direct, but they're all part of it. And one of the articles I gave you talks a little bit about those differences. The last thing I want you to think about is the word peace. So, so a lot of people, they're thinking about, they want to work in peace, they want to make it a career. So I use the word peace to represent kind of the different things that you have to think about and you have to kind of put in order, we would say, in your strategy, right? So those of you who have a strategy, you want to work on peace. Here's the strategy. First is passion, right? So doing conflict work, whether you're working with gangs, whether you're working in schools, you're working to prevent bullying, you're working international work, you're trying to get people together that argue with each other, you're doing humanitarian work, you need a level of passion. You really want to do this work. This is not easy work. Anyone who does community work with young people in communities where there's a high level of violence, it's not like a 9-to-5 job. It really isn't. It's something that they're committed to the core. And it's likely not to be 9 to 5 because of it. right? So this level of passion is really important because a lot of your work is going to be frustrating. You're going to have some good days. You're going to have bad days also. And often the bad days are going to be really bad days. But it's important work that you do it, so you've got to kind of start with that passion sometime. The second one is education, right? So it doesn't really make any difference what you study, provided you do study something and you figure out within that experience how you can learn about peace. So some of you, I asked you beforehand, your psych majors or your nursing majors or your accounting majors or whatever it is that you're majoring, political science, all of those majors are important because they give you the foundational background to understand a field and then allow you to take that field and shape it in a way that you can work towards making peace in a community or building peace in a community. You don't have to study international relations, and you don't have to study conflict resolution. You can study nursing or you can study business, and that would give you that foundation. The third thing is activities. And here what I refer to is often to support what goes inside of a classroom, you have to do things outside of a classroom, right? So the classroom experience is what the professor creates for you. But it's really the applied experience that really becomes useful to you. There's a lot of study that show that you only learn when you do. You only learn when you do, when you engage in something. So having a PowerPoint presentation or giving a lecture is not nearly as powerful as you actually going and engaging in some sort of a project. So think about the things you can do outside the classroom. Maybe there are clubs within your school, human rights club, or dealing with particular issues that you can be involved in. Environmental club, a gay-straight alliance, whatever it is that your issue is, get involved in that club because then things become real to you. Or think about things that you can do in your community. We're talking about you doing humanitarian work. There are lots of needs in your own community, even if you're just carving out an hour a month, right? That can be really a powerful experience for you because it gives you insight into what people are doing, and it makes you feel like you're making a contribution. The fourth thing is developing a community. So when you do this type of work, when you're doing committed to building peace and peace work, often you're cut from a different cloth. You're passionate about things, and this passion may be different than your own community. Your parents might not quite understand it. You come back one day and say, Mom, I'm not going to major in business anymore. I'm going to major in, I'm going to major in peace studies, or I am going to go work, in a soup kitchen. And your father, his jaw just dropped because he's thinking, how are you going to pay that college debt? Because now you've changed your major in such a way that would maybe make it harder for you to pay off the college debt potentially. So one of the things to recognize is developing those set of friends, that community that can support you in what you're doing. People that are like-minded than you are can help you on that journey. And the last thing is the environment in which you work. And what I mean by this is that there are certain types of things that you want to do that you're more likely to do them in some places than other places. And think about this. If you want to be an aspiring actor, you're probably going to say, I'm going to take the train and I'm going to go down to LA. Not that you can't do it in the Bay Area, but there used to be the notion that you've got to go to where the industry is, right? You've got to go to where the action is. And in peace work, that's often it also. If you want to do international stuff, diplomacy stuff, you're going to have to go to the big city, maybe San Francisco or Washington or New York, or go overseas. If you want to do community work, then I'm sure there's community work you can do in Oakland, in your own community. But part of it is going to where it is, going to where the action is, so that you can put yourself where it is and have those experiences. And that often means for people is that uprooting themselves and going somewhere else that's unfamiliar to them. Right.
David, if I might, this is the moment where College of Alameda has a violence intervention specialist program, and we have a certificate in becoming a violence prevention specialist. And one of those courses is being offered in the spring semester, and it's literally a 2-semester certificate, and it's part of our larger program. So if you're interested in doing that kind of
Yeah.
piece work, that's something you would study right here.
Right. And, all communities are struggling, not just Alameda and Oakland. I mean, many communities that struggle. And it's great that you have the resource of taking a course here at the college that you can then apply right away to your own community and make a difference.
And in your handout that you've got, the very last page actually gives you the information about the courses we're offering next semester with the registration information. So if this does interest you, just pointing that out before people start to leave. But
So the last thing I would leave you with, and I don't know if we have enough time to do this. If we had more time, we would. But I want you to kind of think about this on the way out, is that it's one thing for us to listen and to kind of get up and walk around and for us to think about things and so forth. It's really another is to kind of commit and looking at our own communities and things that we have to do, right? And one of the things that I would ask you to do is thinking about your own peace building plan, your own things that you can stake out, that you can make a commitment to. Sometimes those things are very small, they're not big things. So one of them is, what challenges confront your community? Tell me, what are some of the challenges that confront the community of Alameda, the community of Oakland? What are some of the things that you're dealing with here? I'm sorry? Gentrification. You know what gentrification is? We build nice homes, and people who can't afford the nice homes are forced out and live in other communities. And they can afford where they were, and now they can't afford it. Gentrification. What other issues? How about social justice issues? What are relations between blacks and whites and Latinos like in Oakland and Alameda? Is it good? Are there problems? How about poverty? How about gang violence, right? All these are social problems that communities have to deal with, right? Homelessness, right? Economic disparity, right? So all of these are things that fall under this broader concept of peace building. These are things that you can stake out and you can say, I can make a commitment to something like that. Maybe an hour a week. It doesn't have to be extensive. What is your goal? That is, if you identify a problem, what is it that you want to do? What do you want to do personally? Maybe it's a personal goal that you have. You want to develop a skill and awareness that you didn't have before. You want to walk away having a sensitivity to something that you don't know much about. Learning is a lot about putting yourself in situations where you're often uncomfortable, because it's through that uncomfortableness that you learn. What talents that you have that you can contribute to making positive change? Think about all the talents that you have and the things that you can do, your own skill sets. And it's not like being able to write or count. It's things like are more personal, like having a lot of empathy, right? Being able to be a good listener, right? Being able to show a level of concern, being able to carry something through, right? These are the types of skills and abilities that you bring that often are lacking in other people. Who can you work with? Your allies. That is, when you do something, particularly if you're doing it on your own, it's not that you have to do it on your own. Who can you work with other people in your community? The chances are they're like-minded people. If you say one day, I really want to make a change in this area. I'm very upset about whatever, police brutality in my community, or the whole issue of female genital mutilation that takes place in parts of the world, or LGBT rights, whatever it is, I want to make a change about that, okay? So there are other people that are also focusing on the same thing as you are. Find those people and make those people your allies. And then finally, what will you need? Resources. Looking at resources that you have in your community. Sometimes they're organization, sometimes they're ways of funding things, sometimes they're experts that you can pull from your community, help you strategize in the things that you want to do. I often have done this exercise in a community college setting, and I would break the students down and have them work it out on paper and come up with something, and that they would be bound to do and to work on. But I don't know if we have time here, because I know some students have to go on to another class. But think about this yourself when you're leaving, of what things that you can do in order to make that difference and go out in the community. Okay. All right, so thank you. And what I don't want to leave necessarily. I do know that some students had to go to another class, but I want to be here for questions if people have questions, or people have things that I didn't quite answer or things I'm not sure about? No questions? Ideas? Things that they're thinking about? Things that they're troubled about? Things that are going on around the world? You've been following, of course, the conflict that's been going on in Paris and with the Islamic State. It's kind of one of those big global conflicts. But then we have other issues that are more locally based that are going on. If you have questions about that, we could talk about that for a few minutes. Okay? Yes?
Actually, I didn't hear anybody mention it, but there's a huge issue with police relations and community relations.
Police relations and community relations.
Right. And I was just kind of curious as to any suggestions you have in moving in a positive direction.
So you're talking about as it is in Alameda or in Oakland?
Thank you.
Or broadly? Thank you. Yeah. There are a lot of groups that are working on models to improve those type of relationships. One of the things that I would look at, there are a lot of things going on in St. Louis. So one of the programs to look up is something called the Truth Telling Project, which I've worked on if you can Google it. The Truth Telling Project is a project that looks at people telling their stories, starting kind of at the story narrative part of getting out the stories of police community relationship, and then using that as the basis then of developing dialogue and then developing policy from that. So just Google Truth Telling Project and it'll come up. Okay. All right then, well thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, David.
Thank you.